Can anyone train for and finish a marathon? Before getting into running, I was actually a smoker who couldn't even run down the block. I used to hold on to the belief that marathons and just any running race in general was for people who were not like me. I genuinely didn't think that it was physically possible for me to build up to be able to run long distances, let alone a full marathon. But at the time, I don't even think I really understood how long a full marathon was, and if I did, it would have given me even more reason to believe that I probably couldn't do it. Now I have 27 marathons under my belt, and I have actually helped thousands of people go from beginner runner to marathon finisher. In this episode, we are going to talk about what it takes to build up to that marathon distance and how to do it safely so that you can continue to run for a lifetime and not just be a one and done, or not be someone who started training for a marathon, got injured, and then never got around to finishing it. Marathoning maybe used to be just for quote unquote elites back in the 70s or 80s, but with the more recent running boom, we are starting to see that normal everyday people with no prior experience can pick up running and achieve amazing things like building up to the marathon distance. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a few different topics within the realm of training for that first marathon. First, we're going to dive into just if your goal was to run a marathon in the next 6 to 9 months and you had never run before, where should you start? So this could be a really great intro for someone that maybe has taken some time off. Maybe you are thinking about doing that full marathon and maybe you're not completely new or a complete beginner, but the distance does seem a little bit daunting to you. This can really break it down for, hey, if someone off the street just decided, I want to change my life this year and I want to run a marathon, what would it look like for the next 9 months? Sometimes even just hearing what that is for someone that has no experience can actually help you to be more confident, kind of know how to frame up your own training in regards to that. Next, we're going to be talking about how do you know if you're running at the correct pace and how this is actually the most important factor when it comes to avoiding injury and building up to that marathon distance. We'll talk about how you can calculate your exact paces that you need to run and why this is so critical. Next, we're going to be talking about how to build that long run. As all of you know, a marathon is a very long distance, and so it's incredibly important that we build up our long run to support the event that we are training for. We can't just do small 3-4 mile runs and be consistent with that every day. Part of marathon training is that we are going to have to do, not weekly, but almost weekly long runs where we are building that distance. We're going to get up to be running for 2 to 3 hours at a time, maybe even longer, depending on what your goals are and how we approach this. Everyone's long run might cap at a different distance or a different duration, but the idea is that we are going to get quite a few runs over 2.5 hours under our belt, regardless of what your projected finish time is. Next, we're going to be talking about how confidence is actually key in the marathon distance. If you think you can't do it, it's going to handicap you. If you think you can do it, it's going to be great. It's almost better to go in a little bit naive and to feel like you can do it than to go in super nervous, because as you all know, you perform best when you are comfortable, when you're confident. You don't want to have the ego so high that you don't have respect for the distance, but you do want to be confident in your abilities because this is something you can do with training. Next, we're going to be talking about fueling and how this is so key. Fueling can be very confusing because I think if you open up social media, you are bombarded with so many different messages. You've heard from people to exercise while fasted and all of that. I want you to forget everything you've ever heard about exercising while fasted. I want you to forget any benefits you've ever heard about fasting. When it comes to long distance events, such as the marathon, anytime you're going over that 60 to 90 minute threshold where you're doing aerobic activity, you are going to need to fuel in order to reach your highest potential. Can you finish a marathon without fueling? Yes. But if you want to perform your best, feel your best, not get injured, the best thing you can do is to fuel your body. Just like pacing. Could you finish a marathon going out and PRing, running your fastest mile the first mile? Maybe. You probably could. but that would be very painful and it would lead you to not feeling very good. And it's almost like, why would you do that, right? You can do that on a different day. Don't try to PR your mile the first mile of a marathon. But with fueling, it's like, why would you want to go fasted when you can get so many benefits from fueling? They've done so many different scientific studies where they have proved this time and time again, that when you intake a certain amount of carbohydrates and electrolytes per hour, it enhances your performance and allows you to reach your full aerobic potential. Next is how we are going to set a time goal and how we don't want it to be too aggressive, right? You always hear about hitting the wall in a marathon, and I think that was the biggest thing holding me back from that distance. I was so afraid that I just didn't have it in me genetically, that I was going to hit this wall because everyone hits the wall, and I didn't really understand what the wall was. So we're going to be talking about like what is the wall and how you don't have to hit the wall just because you're running 26.2 miles. Jason and I recently did an Ironman, and that would be you swim 2.4 miles it was the river, then we got off, bike ride 112 miles, and then we had to finish that off with a marathon. Most people would probably think, wow, you probably definitely hit the wall there. I mean, if there is ever a wall, that sounds like the marathon you would hit the wall in. And actually, we didn't hit the wall. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly it boils down to two things. Our approach with the pacing, so making sure you're pacing it within your limits. And then next was our fueling strategy. And that allowed us to not hit the wall. And actually, we felt our best at the end of the marathon. And so that's actually something that is possible for you. So as you're listening, think, wow, I can actually feel really good at mile 23 of a marathon. How is that possible? And we're going to share with you how you can feel good at mile 23 of a marathon, because I've done several marathons where I feel really great at the end, and you don't have to hit the wall. So diving into things, if your goal was to run a marathon in the next 6 to 9 months, or maybe, it's January right now and we're recording, let's say you want to run the marathon by the end of the year. So maybe it's in 10 months, maybe 12 months from now, and you've never ran before. Like, you just don't run. What I would recommend doing as a run coach is starting off very small, right? If you don't exercise, you don't really run, we're just going to start with walking. And maybe the first month, all we do is get you walking 4 days a week, because your body just needs enough stress where it's going to elicit a change. If you don't even get 3,000 steps a day, it's going to be a pretty drastic change if I ask you to walk for 30 to 40 minutes 4 days a week. That's going to get your step count up. That's going to say to your body, hey, we're doing a new thing. Your body's going to start making adaptations because it's going to realize you are starting to exercise. And so that's really what we would start off with. See how you respond. Maybe that is like way too easy. Maybe you're like, hey, I already walk. I don't need to do that. Then we would dive into some run walk intervals. And so what would that look like? Well, the first day it would be maybe 20 or 30 minutes. We would do a 5-minute walking warm up. Then we would start you off with a run portion. And the run is anywhere from like 30 seconds to 60 seconds, depending on your comfortability. You just do it maybe at a jogging pace. We're not sprinting here. It's just to get you comfortable. Then you'd walk, and you'd walk for 60 seconds to 120 seconds. And you just keep repeating that for probably 20 minutes total. Maybe you'd only run 10 times in that whole sequence. So you do 10 total minutes of running within your run walk. And then you do a cool down walk at the end. So it's really about gradually building. You would do that, then you would maybe build on how much of the run portion you're doing, right? So the first run, maybe you're running for 60 seconds. The next run, maybe you're going to up that to like 75 seconds every time you run. Then maybe we're going to go into 90 seconds every time you run. And I know this can kind of get a little redundant when I'm saying this out loud, but we actually have a free guide on our website if you want to go check that out, where we actually have laid out exactly what you would need to do if you've never ran before and your goal was to get to a 5K. Be able to run a 5K, which is 3 miles, 3.1 miles, without having to walk. So let's say you want to get into running, I would download that guide. Another really good one, if you have an iPhone or an app, is Coach to 5K. There's a lot of run walk programs out there, and a lot of them are really only going to be like 6 to 8 weeks in duration, and that's going to get you to a level where you're able to run 2 to 3 miles at a time without stopping. So once you're at that place where you can run a 5K, run 3.1 miles without stopping, then that's where our more run-specific training would come in. So if you are looking for that run-walk guide, go to our website, www.runforprs.com, and on the drop-down, it says free plans. You're going to click on Build from Ground Zero. That's our free Coach to 5K, builds you up from 0 miles per week all the way up to doing that 5K, and it's a 6-week program. So then, Jason, how would you approach it if someone comes to us and they're in that 5K shape, they can run 3.1 miles without stopping, whether that's, going to take them 1 hour or 50 minutes, or if they're doing it in like 20 minutes, right? What is the next step?
Right. So great foundation to start with. And then now we're going to start to determine maybe what are the paces that we should be running. So we might do some sort of like VDOT test, right? So if they race a 5K, we can use that, or we might have them do a 1 mile time trial, something like that. And then we can start to structure some workouts, right? We might offer them something a little bit more challenging once a week or once every 2 weeks to start. And then those other runs aren't anything fancy. They're just going to be like aerobic, easy runs, kind of like what they've been doing. And so we're slowly going to progress using the progressive overload principle, intensity and mileage. And we have to be careful when we're doing both of those at the same time, because we don't want it to result in injury. So the goal is really to always finish each run, each workout, each week, kind of like feeling like you could do a little bit more. And that kind of keeps you hungry for more, right? And so that's how I approach it. I've had a lot of success with athletes moving from run walk all the way up to running consistently. I remember thinking back to one lady that I started with. She was only doing 10-second run intervals, and we got her up to, I think, 90-second run intervals by 6 weeks. So you might think that's a long time, but for her that was an appropriate amount of time. And so everybody is going to progress differently at a different rate. It's based on your background, based on the time you're able to commit, all these other factors, right? So, I think that's a great topic. It's fun to discuss.
Yeah, so when you say time trial, one of the ones that comes to mind in terms of more of a beginner, a lot of my athletes that are newer or coming back postpartum, coming back from time off, I have them start with a 1 or a 1.5 mile time trial. Mm-hmm. What is a time trial? Time trial is basically where we're testing to see your 1 rep max, so to speak. So if you're in the lifting world, a lot of times people will talk about their 1 rep max. So you go in and you see how much weight can I squat for one squat. And that really tells you a lot of information in terms of what should your squat weight be for if you're doing like a 5x5 squat, or if you're doing, 3x8 or whatever it is you're doing. It can help give you percentages. And so in the running world, we like to take a fitness test. Sometimes that's a 1 mile. Sometimes we're taking a 5K. Sometimes we take 1.5 mile. You can really choose your distance. And we plug that into a calculator similar to in the weightlifting world, but we have one that we really like called the VDOT calculator. It's what most run coaches will use, right? So that's VDOT. There's a lot of variations of that calculator online. It's something that anyone can access. If you're really into analytics, it's a great one to plug in your times. If you're more so just looking for, hey, this is my fastest mile, I did this time trial, I tested my 1 mile max, I can go, my fastest 1 mile is 10 minutes. Can you just tell me what paces to run? Yeah, roughly, if you have a mile time, I would say, let's say your fastest mile is 10 minutes. A really quick and easy way to figure out what is my easy pace going to be. I would add about 3 minutes per mile to that the fastest 1 mile you can. About 3 minutes, and the range would be anywhere from 3 minutes fast, 3 minutes slower, to maybe 5 minutes slower. So if your fastest ever mile is 10 minutes per mile, your easy pace range is going to be 3 to 5 minutes per mile slower. So that's going to be 13 minutes per mile to 15 minutes per mile. Now, a lot of people, when I say that, are thinking, that's really slow. And yes, it is really slow. But what you're asking yourself to do is train for a marathon. Marathon is not the same as a 5K. It's not the same as a half marathon. And if you do not have a big background in endurance sports, you really got to focus on building up that aerobic base. You have to allow your body a chance to adapt to the distance of going just the long distance. And if you are going at a pace that is too fast, too aggressive, it's going to put additional stress on your body. And so I want everyone to know who's listening that training for a marathon is a very big stress on your body. And if you don't have a background in marathon running or in doing long distance events, it's going to be an even bigger stress on your body. And so that why this is so important is that this is the tactic, this is the strategy that will actually allow you to build up, not get injured, not feel like you're dying mid-cycle, not throw in the towel on your goal. Because how many times have we said we want to train for a marathon, and then we go out, we do a bunch of runs, we get the training plan, and we're like, this is too hard, right? We've all been there. I've even been there, right? We all have this tendency to be like, well, I can physically run faster, so why can't I just go a little bit faster? I like to see those fast paces. I like to feel like I'm pushing myself. I'm telling you, the secret here is that if you have the patience, if you have the willpower to just slow down and embrace that 13-minute to 15-minute per mile pace, you're going to be like, I can do this. And you will finish this training cycle. You will be able to finish the marathon. And who cares what pace you run the marathon, right? It doesn't matter, because your goal is you want to get to the start line healthy. You want to get to the starting line in a place where you know you can cover the distance, not injured, in it for the long haul, feeling very confident. And so my number one goal would be, let's just go whatever pace we need to, go as slow as you can. It's almost like a contest, right? How slow can you go? And not in a term of like going out fast and then having to suffer fest it through. No, like let's start off that first mile as slow as you can go. And that's really going to help you. If you're someone that's like, I don't have a watch, I don't care about pace, I don't like any of this. I don't like analytics. I don't want to talk about the pace. Okay, what I would recommend you do in that case is go at a pace that feels like you could go at for 4 hours. Just like an all-day kind of pace. Like if someone said, hey, you wake up in the morning, oh, it's a fundraising event. If you run for 4 hours straight today, you're going to get $1 million, right? Like, and the only rule is like you have to maintain a consistent pace. You'd be like, all right, I can do that. And all of a sudden, it's something in our brain, it clicks that, okay, I can do this. I can find the pace that I can stay at all day. So I would just think about, 2 to 3, maybe 4 on the 10 scale. So on that effort scale, it's a very low effort. Think of it more as like a brisk walk effort rather than a run. It's more of like a jog, right? Your breathing is going to be really light. You should almost be able to nasal breathe if you're someone that has, clear sinuses, whatnot. But it's something that's going to be a lot easier on your body than you're initially anticipating when you think go out and run. Think of it as jog. Next, we're going to be talking about how to build that long run. So pacing becomes very important here, and that's why I mentioned, hey, we want to go a lot slower than we think we should, because as you're building that long run, what you're going to start to see happen as you get longer and longer is that you might, let's say you're not listening to my advice and you're going out, you're going hard on your long runs, or you're not going as slow as I tell you to go, you might reach a distance of long run where all of a sudden your body is forcing you to go slower. Like maybe you're having to walk it in because, I went, I got greedy. Instead of going 13-minute pace, I started at 10:30 or 11:30, and then at the end I had to walk or I couldn't finish. And so that is why it's really important to go the correct pace, but also know that we're building up to that longer distance. And so in order for your body to make those adaptations, you have to be going at that zone 2 correct pacing to continue to build off of that. And that brings up a good point is once you start getting into those longer long runs, it might be a good idea to have a half marathon on the schedule if you've never done one, or if it's been a while since you've done one. I would like to see a half marathon maybe halfway between when you start running and when your goal marathon is. That way it can just be a guiding post, something to aim for, and then we still have time to continue to build and do a marathon training cycle after that half. A lot of people will think that a marathon is just twice the distance of a half marathon, and I like to think of it more as like the half marathon is dipping your toes in the endurance world. You're really getting a sense for what it feels like to go over 90 minutes in duration. It's the first really long distance event you're going to do. When you move up to the marathon distance, you're going to really like 4x that. You're going to be feeling a lot of things you didn't really feel.
Mhm.
If you could get away with improper pacing in a half and it be difficult the last couple miles of a half marathon, it's going to be so much more amplified in a marathon. So you're going to hit that slow down at the same point, but you're going to have to go 13.1 more miles at that pace. So what I would recommend doing is really for that first half, have the goal be to run a consistent pace or to start slower, finish faster. You want to train your body the entire time throughout all of training that we start slow and we finish fast. And that's going to help you so much just as you get into endurance running because it lets your body empty the tank at the end. What a lot of people do is they'll empty the tank midway, right? And so when we always hear, oh, I hit the wall, it's because they emptied the tank too soon. And so the best thing you can do is start nice and slow and gradually increase your pace. And that's something you would want to incorporate pretty much on all of your long runs just to help you build that muscle memory. Especially being new to the sport, you really will race how you train. And so you want to practice starting slow, finishing a little faster. And it's okay if you're starting at, 16 minutes per mile pace and your fastest mile is 10 minutes per mile. You can go as slow as you need to, keep the heart rate in zone 2, and just have fun with it.
Yeah, I really like how you talk about embracing that slow pace, right, and just keeping it easy. And then over time, you're going to gain experience, right, from each long run. Let's say you do that half marathon, and you learn from it, right? So you figure out like how much slower you should start than the last time, right? So if you start at 16 minutes, you can get down to 10 minutes. Well, then next time maybe we could start at like 14:30, and so we're just kind of making these changes as we go, figuring out how to adjust. The big things we want to avoid are those big mistakes, right, where we have a massive positive split, where we go out way too fast and then we blow up. It's better to do the opposite, like we just talked about, and I think that it kind of leads into the next piece that we're going to talk about, which is confidence. And really, the goal of running should be to always feel like you can keep going. If you're struggling to get through a run, like a training run, then that's not a good sign. You want to reflect on, okay, I should have probably slowed down, or I should have, adjusted my pace here. And so I think the more you can be honest with yourself, that sets you up more for success in the future.
Yeah, really good point. And one last thing with the long run is when you're building it up, really just adding 10 to 15 minutes per weekend on your long runs, and don't build every single weekend. Like, you want to have a cutback week every other week, every third week, but make sure you're incorporating that. Something that's really common is that we start to get a skewed perspective of how we feel on the baseline. So running, you kind of have to be pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And so what becomes almost unintentional is that we get used to not feeling super great all the time. Like maybe we're used to having a little fatigue in our legs. And so when a cutback week comes on the board, we might think, well, I don't really need that yet because I'm not feeling completely destroyed. But the idea is that we want to incorporate these cutback weeks where we do a little bit less volume before we truly need them, because we are going to be building for a very long time when it comes to the marathon. And the number one thing that happens to people that will derail them is that they either get injured or burnt out. And so you do actually want to incorporate these cut back deload weeks before you really feel like you need them, because if you feel like you need them, chances are we've probably already done a little bit too much, and that's okay. The best way that we can go about doing that is maybe just scale back. So if you're feeling like, wow, I need one after a week or two, maybe we need to run a little bit less weekly mileage, maybe we need to not go quite as far on our long run, or maybe we need to be scheduling our deload or cutback weeks more frequently. Use all of your feelings as feedback for the training, especially if you're newer to the sport. You don't really know what your history is, and just because you find a training plan online that has a certain weekly mileage or a certain weekend long run pattern where you're doing 3 long runs in a row that consecutively build each weekend, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's best for you. And I even find for myself when I'm marathon training that I like to do long runs every other weekend. And I think that can be really common and a really good approach, especially if you give yourself a long enough time to train. Doing a long run every other weekend can be really key. And like you said, confidence can be key. Everyone is so nervous about the marathon distance, and even doing 27 marathons myself, I still get nervous to do long runs. And I think a lot of people don't talk about that side of things. They think, wow, 16 miles is so far. And I've had people make offhanded comments to me, and I've even made it to my friends before that do marathons where, wow, you must love doing long runs, or that must be easy for you to go out and just hammer a 15, 16 mile long run. But the bottom line is, of everyone I've ever talked to that's run marathons, people are still nervous about the distance. It's still daunting and scary because, you never know what's going to happen. And everyone out there has similar feelings. And so don't feel like you're the only one that doesn't really know what they're doing or that is nervous to go out and do those long runs. I find that it's really challenging mentally to get out the door and go on any long run that's longer than an hour. It's a beast. And so some of the things that I like to do that you can incorporate are finding something to distract yourself and remain calm in those early miles of not only the race, but also of your training runs. Sometimes that can be running with a group, running with a friend. One trick I like to use if I'm running alone is I'll listen to an audiobook the first half, and then the second half I get to switch it to music. And so it kind of helps me stay calm and distract my mind. And I also try not to really look at my watch the first half because it can be kind of mental if you look down and it's mile 3 and you have a 20-mile long run and thinking, I still have 17 more miles. And also don't judge it based on how you feel the first couple miles. So you might go out and have a long run, like a 10-mile long run is the longest run you've ever done, and you don't feel good at mile 2. That's not really fun when you ever run like that, but it happens to everyone. And you might have days where it's like, wow, this feels like a real struggle. I don't know how I'm going to finish this run, let alone this marathon, But the bottom line is everyone, even elites, have days like that where they just feel like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought. But the biggest factor to know is that every time you finish a run where it's not your best day, you're building your confidence and your ability to do the thing you said you're going to do. So that way, when it comes to race day, no matter how you feel on race day, you're confident enough to know that you've been through it in training and you can apply whatever mental skills that you developed in your training on race day, whether you feel great or not so great.
Yeah, I think it can be really hard for your confidence if your long runs don't go well. And so you want to set yourself up so that, you do everything in your power to have a pleasant experience. So I like how you gave some examples on what you do. For me, I focus so much on my fueling, and I'm just like thinking about that during the run. It kind of helps distract my mind. Like, I'm going to take this here. And sometimes I'm even doing the math in my head, right? And I know, audiobooks, podcasts, all that is great. Finding new routes, like just trying to get away from obsessing about the pace, right? And you want to just sort of just lean into that effort and keep it easy, right? And then over time, I think, is when once you've done like a few of these races, I think that's when people start to put like a performance related goal on the marathon. And I think that's why people get so nervous is they know, like, number one, the distance is hard enough as it is, right? You talked about respecting the distance earlier, and that's so true. Like, no matter what, it's always super hard. And if you have a goal tied to something, so much has to go right for that to happen, especially if you've been working to refine, your goal and get better over the years. Like, everything kind of has to align, right? And so we want to practice the way we want to race. And so, getting up extra early, allowing more time for the bathroom, fueling a good breakfast, all these things, making sure you have adequate electrolytes and carbs. It's really big for confidence. And then obviously your approach to how you pace your easy run from the start, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, so many good points there. Fueling becomes really critical when it comes to that long run. It's no joke, right? You can get away with fasted runs if you're doing something shorter, But when you're making that jump to doing anything over 60 to 90 minutes, it really hits different, and fueling is going to be everything in that case. So eating a carb-rich breakfast is number one. Anytime you're going to do a long run, you want to have a carb-rich breakfast, which kind of goes against everything you might hear from like wellness gurus out there, especially if you're newer to the sport. If you're someone that consumes a lot of running content, I'm sure this has just been, hammered home with you lately. But if you're newer, it's like you need to be eating more carbs. And carbs are what helps you perform when it comes to long distance events. So eat that carb rich breakfast before. And then when you're on those longer runs, you want to get used to taking in 60 grams of carbs per hour. That's usually like a minimum, right? If you're going to be running at a faster pace, or maybe you are bigger, right? Maybe you're like 6'5" and you're 200 plus pounds, you're probably going to need a little bit more carbs than maybe someone that's 5 foot, 100 pounds, right? So it does vary, but I think a really good starting point is at 60 grams of carbs per hour. That's what I use personally. I find that it works really well. What does that look like? Well, for me, I take a gel every 20 to 30 minutes. And that seems very frequent for people who maybe are like, whoa, I thought it was every 45 minutes or 40. But if you can, try to do them a little bit closer together, especially if you're trying to like do more of a performance related, really racing it, you're going to burn through more carbs. Next, it's aiming for 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour. Again, it's a rough estimate. You might want to work with a registered dietitian to get the exact amounts for you personally, but that's just what I utilize for my own marathon training. If it's humid, it's probably going to be a little bit more, or if it's hot. And obviously your weight and all those things come into factor here. And this also becomes really important because you're thinking, how am I getting 1,000 milligrams of sodium? How am I going to get 60 grams of carbs all per hour? Well, you have to come up with a really good fueling strategy, and this requires a lot of planning in advance. So you might want to research what sort of gels are going to be best for you, looking at the carbohydrate content of the gels, doing some math in our head. It's almost like doing math word problems. We have an elementary school age kid, so I feel like this could be a really good math problem for someone. So you literally will have to sit down with a pencil or in like a Google Doc and try to come up with your fueling strategy. And this is something you want to practice on all of your long runs. So you're going to need to know how many gels you need, or what sort of breakfast you're going to have before, and it's almost like a whole math problem. And so we're into triathlon training, and they often say that the fueling is the fourth principle. So triathlon is swim, bike, run, and then fueling is the most important. So you really can't reach your potential without that fueling. And when you train in the way that you want to race, you're just going to do everything you did during training on race day. So it's really smooth. And sometimes people will say, well, how do you get your electrolytes, the 1,000 milligrams of sodium? There's a lot of different ways you can, depending on what the race rules are. Sometimes you can carry those hydration backpacks. I like to run the first half of the race with a handheld and then kind of toss that at one of the aid stations and then continue on course with whatever they have for the electrolytes. Jason, I know that you sometimes use salt pills. How does that work for you?
Yeah, so, I rely a lot on Salt Stick. That's a great product because they have capsule pills, and then they have fast chews as well. I like the capsule pills because they're higher content of sodium. I think it's 200 milligrams per pill. So I will take a little Ziploc baggie or like a little tube, like those little tiny, kind of like a Nuun tube almost, maybe even smaller than that. And you basically just fill it with pills, and you just have that. Depending on the distance, you plan ahead. When we were doing Ironman, I think I took probably like 20 of them. I don't know. It was a lot, right? Because, we're out there for 12 plus hours, 1,000 milligrams an hour. You can only, get so much through liquids. And so I needed to rely on the Salt Stick pills. And there's another product called Base Salt, which is basically like, it looks like pink Himalayan salt, and you can just add that to water or, however you want to take it. I've had athletes that put a little on their hand and they just lick it, right? So, I mean, there's so many ways you can get more sodium. There's a lot more products coming out now. I know you found gels that have a pretty good amount of sodium in them. But, I would spend some time doing some research, like you mentioned. Thefeed.com is a great site where you can research different products. You can even buy products like one at a time if you want to just try a sample. But yeah, there's a lot of math involved, especially the longer you plan to be out there. But for a marathon, if you're going to be out there anywhere from 4 to 6 hours or even longer, yeah, you got to figure out, okay, what are they going to serve on course? If it's like Gatorade Endurance or Noon, just kind of looking at the label, the profile of how much sodium's in that. I know Noon Sport only has 300 milligrams of sodium in a tablet. So, if you're drinking Dixie cups of maybe three ounces or less at every aid station, you're not getting a lot of sodium from that, right? So that's why it's, I think we've moved to carrying our own, relying on our own more because, for one, you sort of have to in the Ironman, right? You have your bottles on your bike and all that, but you can then consume the products that you like and that sit well with you and you can train with. And that's what training is about, is experimenting, making sure things sit well with you. If it's giving you a little GI distress, maybe try something else, right? Or give it a few times, because sometimes it can take a couple times for your body to get used to something. And so never try anything new on race day. Don't just be like, okay, I'm going to just drink all the Gatorade at the marathon, even though I didn't have any during training, right? So do your research ahead of time, figure out what they're going to serve, buy what you're planning to take at the course if you're going to do that. Supplement with some extra stuff. We like Relight for electrolytes. People like Element. There's a lot of different things out there. And yeah, I think the one thing we didn't mention was the calculator on precision hydration. We talked about that in previous podcasts. If you want an estimate of how much you might need based on your weight and the weather and your event and all that, you can Google that precision hydration calculator and plug in all your info there.
Yeah, a lot of really good things on fueling. And sometimes it can be really overwhelming. I know when I was training for my first marathon, I thought, this sounds like a lot of information, and I just didn't really see the benefit, especially because I had tried gels before, and I thought, well, I feel the same if I'm using a gel or if I'm not. And I had a very big misconception as to what exactly fueling was supposed to help you do. I thought that if you took fuel, you were going to feel better. But I just want to clear the air for anyone that maybe has that as a misconception. So what fueling does is you take it before you really need it, and it allows your body to run on glucose and not deplete your glycogen stores. So what happens when people say they hit the wall is that their body has run out. It is depleted. And oftentimes you don't hear about people hitting the wall until they're at mile 20, 22. Sometimes it happens earlier. You can hit the wall at any point during the race, but it's typically very common around the 20-mile mark. And if you look at the average marathon finish time, it's probably about 4.5 hours. So you're probably coming in around mile 20, probably around a little over 3 hours. And so in training for my first marathon, I didn't really go much over 3 hours. So I didn't really experience what happens when you don't fuel for over 3 hours, or if you grossly under fuel, which is really what I was doing. And so you might not listen to this advice and you might be tempted to just, I don't need that. And I'll tell you what will happen is that you're going to reach a place of glycogen depletion, which is called hitting the wall. And it will not be fun. Things are going to hurt real bad. So it's really important that we have the concept in our mind that when we're fueling, it's so that later on in the race, we don't hit the wall and go glycogen depleted. So the fuel that we're ingesting at mile 2, at mile 4, we're doing it before we need it. Think of it as like doing oil changes on your car. You do that before your car breaks down. But if you never gave an oil change to your car, all of a sudden one day in the very near future, you might be able to skip multiple oil changes before your car totally just gets wrecked. But eventually it's going to get wrecked. And so what happens is the same with fueling. It's like you can skip a lot of fuel and still feel fine. but eventually you're going to hit that wall. And so what I like to think of fueling is, it's not going to give you superpowers. It's not going to give you any sort of extra oomph. So when you take it, you probably won't feel anything unless you're like super in tune with your body, which I find most people aren't. Like I can maybe feel something now that I really am in tune with things, but back then couldn't feel nothing. But anywho, you probably won't feel anything. And that's the point. It's just going to allow you to feel normal. And so it's going to allow you to maybe not hit that wall that's coming, and it's going to prolong how long you feel normal, if that makes sense. So don't expect superpowers from these gels. Expect to feel normal for longer when you're running. And I often find that if I am hitting the wall, it kind of feels like my legs feel extremely heavy, like almost lead-like. The pace maybe slows down. Mentally, it's like almost like a confusion comes over me. Maybe having to walk up hills. I don't know, what are other things that would... I mean, I know... Have you hit the wall? I mean, well, I think we all have.
I've cramped, and that's due to not replenishing the sodium, the electrolytes, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's more common for me to have happen.
Okay.
And especially, a lot of people that I coach too, I see that as like an issue in the marathon. They get to mile 16, 18, 20, wherever, and they get cramps, right? And they're able to like sometimes stop and stretch and just like kind of run through it, just, it depends, right? And but that's where I think having a good fueling plan can help prevent that. And as far as hitting the wall, that's that used to be more common to me, like energy wise, like slowing way down back when I was in track and I was doing like higher speed workouts or races where I completely hit the wall the last 400 and I'm just struggling to finish, right? So, but yeah, as far as like endurance races, I think
like glycogen depletion.
It could be, it can affect everyone differently.
Probably not. I feel like you probably haven't really hit the wall.
Right. I think because of my experiences, like I've been pretty good about knowing how to pace too. Like it's all about how you pace. If I were to start those half marathons back when I was really fit, if I started them like I would run, so I was always a guy that could run pretty good at the mile and the 5K, right? But like there was a lot of people I could beat in those distances that I could not beat in the half marathon.
Right.
Like Coach Ben Jacobs is one of the guys that we bring as an example. If I would have went out at his pace in the half marathon, I would have hit the wall by mile 6 or mile 7. So you're just kind of learning like what you can handle, and I think that comes with a lot of training experience and racing experience. But
right, that brings up a really good point, because we're saying if you fuel, you're not going to hit the wall. But there's a caveat there. You can fuel all you want, but if you're going at an inappropriate pace, you're still going to hit the wall. Like, you could race, like we mentioned in this podcast, you could race the first mile of a marathon. You would hit the wall by mile 2, right? So it's just really finding the appropriate pace for yourself. And like you were saying, when you hit a wall in the 1 mile, maybe you were at the 1K mark, or
right, like so early. If you're running 64-second laps, and then your last one's like a 74, that's considered hitting the wall. But yeah, it's still a fast pace when you think about comparing that to just like regular interval pace or whatever. But yes,
I sometimes call that bonking.
Bonking, yeah, or just like a huge positive split. Yep. Yeah. A huge fade, or however you want to call it, dying.
Right. And I think, so like obviously that can happen in the long distance stuff if you don't fuel. But again, like you were saying, it can happen when there's either a pacing error or just like you're having an off day. So if a pacing error is like you thought you were in better shape than you actually were and you went out too hard. Sometimes if you just have like an off day, let's say you're pretty aggressive with your goals already and you set a goal that was pretty aggressive for the shape that you're in. And so if you're maybe more of an experienced marathoner, or you're just experienced at running and you decide for your first marathon, you're going to really get after it. And maybe you did a recent 5K and it said, you did 7 minutes per mile for that 5K. And you said, okay, I'm going to run 7:30 per mile for the marathon. Wow. Could you do it? Maybe, some people can. And I would define that as an aggressive goal, right? You're going 30 seconds per mile slow. I mean, I don't know. Maybe more more in the realm of like realistic within your limits would probably be more like a 750. I think that's more realistic. So if you decided you're going to pick a 750 pace then for your full marathon, I would say that's an extremely aggressive goal. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I'm saying that's aggressive. And so if you go out on that pace, the likelihood of hitting a wall is higher at that pace than if you decided, the same person decided, you know what, I'm going to choose for this marathon, I'm going to select a 9-minute per mile pace. I say the likelihood of that individual hitting the wall a lot lower because you're not going at as fast of a pace. There's there's more wiggle room. So if you're having a really bad day and you're going 750 per mile, you might hit that wall at mile 8, right? If you're having a real bad day and you're going 9 minutes per mile, you might not hit the wall at all, or you might hit it at mile 22 or whatever. So it's just about how aggressive is your goal relative to your fitness level. And so this is a really important topic because as a new marathoner, as a new runner, I was always advised by, my predecessors in the coaching world to not put a time goal on it and to just experience the distance. I really did not like that advice. And I don't think a lot of people do like that advice because it sounds like to the other person that you're saying, oh yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal, just like go experience it, and I don't believe in you. Kind of like this undertone of like, you're not gonna have a good day, like you're not capable, blah, 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 all those things. But I think behind it was more of, the intention was that they wanted you to have a positive experience. And I can see that now. They just wanted you to not feel terrible during the race because they want you to be able to finish it and feel like, wow, that was awesome. Because you do really only get one first marathon, and it can go one of two ways, really. It can go like really well and you can feel good at the end, or you can feel not good at the end. And so despite everyone telling me like your goal should just be to finish, I decided to put like a pretty, honestly, it wasn't even an aggressive time goal. But I had a time goal and I had a pacing plan and I had a strategy, and I was the person that was probably in a 5K shape of about 7:15 per mile. And I said, I think I can do this thing at like 8:45, 8:30 per mile. It was mildly aggressive, but I still bonked, hit the wall. And so there's a lot of factors that go into those things. But I think if I would have actually listened to that advice and just gone out and run it within myself at a pace that felt good, I don't think I would have had that wall hitting experience at mile 20 of that marathon. Because what ends up happening when you put a time goal on it is that you start getting really attached to paces and you stop listening to your body. And so especially if you're newer and you're trying to figure out the pace, you get really attached to your watch. And so you look down at it a lot and, oh, I'm going slower than I thought I was. And I just find that's too much noise. We just need to learn how to go at a comfortable pace. So in your training, just kind of go at that comfortable pace. Try to just trust yourself, and whatever your finish time is, who cares, right? It's just a finish time. It's a marathon. You just finished a marathon. And so often, and I've seen this before at races, and it always just breaks my heart when someone's at the finish line and they just are like, I've seen people throw things and swearing and getting mad, and like their kids are there saying like congratulations, and they're like kicking the ground because they missed their time goal by a minute. And I know a lot of people listening to this are like, I would never do that, or that sounds really extreme, but maybe you would do that to yourself in your head. And you really want to get away from anything that's going to give you such a hard time. It's like 1 minute, it's not the end of the world. You can always go and do another marathon. You want to just experience it for what it is. And if your fitness level is 4:01 for your marathon instead of 3:59, it's all the same. Yeah, like one of them sounds cooler, but it was right there, and you can't beat yourself up over it. And this is coming from someone that ran a 3:01 marathon. And when I finished, so many people apologized to me. They said, I'm so sorry. I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're so sorry? I was like, This is great. Because I was at peace with the idea of, even if I don't run a
Right.
sub 3, like, I'm still giving it my all, and there's nothing I can do. And so a lot of people are apologizing, or they think that you are hurt by it. But I think getting to a place where you aren't so attached to the time goal can be a really great place to be at, because it avoids any of those time pressure things where you're going out hot, and you might be more likely to hit the wall if you do that. So the best way to avoid hitting that wall, I think, pick a less aggressive pace and run more within yourself. So, like, if you're just not vibing, like, the first couple miles, just chill, right? Just, like, chill out. And then you'll maybe get that second wind. You'll feel better at the end of the race. Instead of forcing the pace, like, oh, you have to hit this pace. And then when you get to mile 13, you have already beat yourself up for the last 13 miles, force yourself to go a pace that was not within the range of what you had today, and then the last 13 miles become this grind. And I've seen that happen and play out. So I think the best approach, and I've coached so many athletes to do this, where, hey, I just want to feel good. I want to finish this marathon, don't have a time goal. I'm like, yes, we can do this. And we just have the greatest of experiences, because we teach them how to run within themselves. We do a lot of progression runs in the training. We do a lot of effort-based runs, and I find that the mindset and the mentality of how those athletes feel during training, during the marathon, after the marathon, is just like night and day difference from other athletes who are like wanting to have a pace by pace for each mile of the race, and calculating to the exact second what their exact second finish time is. And I'm not saying you can't be successful with that. I'm actually more like that second individual that really likes the math and stuff. But I think there's an aspect of, okay, we can do the math, we can look at it, but you have to separate yourself from when you're in the actual race environment. If things aren't going to plan, you need to just realize that it's going to play out how it's going to play out. You have to trust your body, have faith in things. And that is something that you can apply to your training. So if you have a training plan, let's say your workout is you have to do 3 by 1 mile at 8 minutes per mile. What that looks like is maybe in your head before the workout, you're like, I really want to hit 8 minutes per mile. I want to hit like 7:55 for one of them. And that's like your goal. And then when you're in the workout, all of a sudden that first one beeps off at like 8:10. And so you have a choice there. You can either, okay, listen to my body, adjust, we're going to go like 8:10 for the next one, just go off of that because that seems to be like where my body's at today. Or you can be like, no, I don't accept this. I'm going to like go as fast as I can to like make up for stuff, and I'm going to race this workout. And if you are always approaching it by not accepting it, trying to race the workout, trying to like beat the clock, I think that can sometimes lead to those negative racing experiences, because what you need to be practicing during training is adjusting on the fly, right? So some days that 8 minute per mile for mile reps might actually feel too easy, and you might be like, I can go 7:55 today. But then maybe 2 weeks later or a week later, you're doing a similar workout and you have to hit similar paces, but you go a little slower. You can't let that get to you mentally, because some days you're going to feel great, some days you're not. And if you're constantly forcing yourself to try to hit the exact same pace or faster every single time you do a workout, you might end up burning yourself out. It could lead to injury. It could just be more like a mental thing, and then it trickle into your racing experience, your racing mindset. So I think always giving yourself that ability to adjust and not always be so tied down to what the pace says, what your watch says, and all that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think we get so fixated on this time, and we create this time standard in our head. It's like that example workout you just gave. I bet if that same workout was 3 by 1.25 miles, and the person ran the first one at 8:10, they would not. It would be like a different thought process about it. But because it was that perfect mile, they just wanted that pace under 8. And so it's like we do that with races too, with race results. We get fixated on a number, whether it's 25 flat for 5K or 4 hours even for the marathon, or whatever it is. And it's a lot of times we just set this goal because it seems like a challenge and it's a perfect round number, or it's 10, 15, 20 minutes faster than what we've done previously. And I think, yeah, when you're not able to adjust that goal, like throughout the course of training and throughout a race experience itself, then you're not very, what's the word? You're not,
Flexible.
yeah, not being flexible with yourself within your own, within your own event or your running environment that you're in currently, then you're not always going to, get a result that you're proud of. And so, yeah, you got to be flexible with your training. I think it's better to, and I kind of started rewording the way I ask athletes this question instead of asking them what's their goal for the marathon, right? I ask them based on their training, what do they feel is a pace they want to start at for the marathon? And we can just kind of start there, right? And then we can talk about, okay, well, let's go with this range of paces. And so if you look at it from that perspective, like, okay, for the first 5K, I want to be between this pace range. I think it just sets you up so much better to, not go out hard, first of all, right? And not make that pacing error mistake. But just it takes your focus away from the end result time and focuses more on kind of the process of just running.
Wow.
And I think that's really helpful for athletes.
Yeah, and I think it can be really hard. We don't want to tie our ego, self-worth, our accomplishment to these external validation, external times. And I see this play out for a lot of people, and they recently changed the Boston Marathon qualifying times, and they did that, I want to say, in the fall. And so I had a lot of athletes that were gearing up for fall marathons, and when it came time to talk about the pacing plan, most people were pretty level-headed about it, but I did have a lot of people that would have qualified if they were still at the old standards. And, in that discussion of pacing plans, they came out and said, this is really tough. I feel like I'm in shape I know I can run 3:34, and that was the old BQ time.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm tempted to say, let's have the pacing plan be 3:29. But they were like, I know that I'm not they're like, I just don't feel confident in 3:29. And I was so proud of them for being okay, let's go with the time that you feel you're in shape for. Why would we, if you feel like if that was always what was your number one capability, don't let all these external things like what Boston says their new qualifying standard is, or what you think you need to run in order to get into the Boston Marathon, because that's a whole nother cup of tea. Because you're running a Boston qualifying, people think you won't get in, so they want this 10-minute buffer, and so you might be in great shape to run that, what is it, a 3:25 now, a 3:24, but if you think, oh no, that's not going to get me in, so now I want to change my time to 3:17 when you're really in 3:24 shape, it just becomes this whole roundabout thing. But back to the athlete, she ran exactly 3:34, which was a PR for her. She's been a runner for over a decade, and so I just always think, wow, what would have happened if we would have maybe went out a little bit faster? And she was so thankful that we stuck with that pacing plan, because it was exactly how it was perfect. And it allowed her a little bit of adjustment kind of on the fly there. Whereas I've seen so many times, and even myself included, where you're like, I really want to run X pace or hit Y time, and you are just gun to your head, and you have to try to hit that pace. Then it's just not the appropriate pace for your fitness level. And sometimes people really try to stretch it, and rarely do I see it work out. I've seen it work out a few times, but generally speaking, it goes back to that whole hitting the wall. And that's really what we just try to avoid happening for people, especially because a lot of people are afraid of the marathon. They're afraid to step up and run the marathon because they hear people like us talking on these podcasts about how you're going to hit the wall. But really, I feel like the wall only happens if a few things are present. If you don't train at all, if you don't fuel, and or if you don't pace it appropriately.
Right.
I truly believe that any able-bodied person that doesn't have any health issues or whatever, or any disability, can train for a marathon if they just commit to, hey, 4 days a week, I'm going to be active. I'm going to work out, and on the weekends, 2 to 3 times a month, I'm going to get out there for a few hours and do my long run. I'm not saying everyone can do it at a certain time, but I really think that maybe it would be a run-walk approach for some people. Maybe it would be really more of a jog, but I think it's something that most people can do. But because there's so much jargon out there, Boston Qualify and this pace, that pace, and hitting the wall, people are afraid. Because it's already scary to think running 26.2 miles, but then when you start talking about all these, this and that, I think we just need to remove some of that and not have there be such a barrier to entry, right? The wall doesn't have to happen. I've done so many marathons where I don't race it. I do it more for fun, and it's really enjoyable. And I've had a lot of athletes where they're like, I don't have a time goal. I just want to do the marathon. And they love it. And it's a great way to do something that you didn't think was previously possible. And it's also another way just to stay active. Like sometimes people, they want their thing. They want something that helps them stay healthy, where they can travel around the world. There's so many cool races you can do. And why not do a 26.2? So if that's where you're at, I definitely think moving less towards those aggressive pacing plans and more towards just like enjoying it, what pace feels good, is a really good approach. And so we work with a variety of different athletes here at Run for PRs. The number one thing that we like to do is make sure that training is sustainable and that we like people to be able to train for a lifetime. So we are really big on injury prevention, the long-term approach to training, making sure you're happy and healthy for a long time, whether you have goals to qualify for Boston to get as fast as possible, or your goal is just to run for fun, challenge yourself in little ways. You don't have to run for a time-based PR. We work with people who have all different types of goals. So if that's something you're interested in, we always offer a free 7-day trial here at Run for PRs, where you get the opportunity to work with a coach one-on-one for a week for free. We do a phone consultation where we can get to know you. We also do an analysis on your background and your goals. So we have you fill out an intake form, and then we will assign a coach based on who is the best fit, based on your background, goals, experience level. All of those things go into consideration here. We have a whole team of coaches that have a lot of experience helping athletes of all different levels. So if that's something you're interested in, you can fill out the form at www.runforprs.com to get a free 7-day trial. Again, that's www.runforprs.com. Thanks for tuning in.